You ever catch yourself talking to yourself in a way you'd never speak to someone you love? I mean, really, have you listened to the tone you use when you're alone with your thoughts? Let's talk about that voice inside, the one that shapes everything, even when the world feels like it's falling apart. When I speak to myself this way, gently, deliberately, with truth and dignity, I begin to shift the axis of my entire life. Most people underestimate the impact of the voice they carry within. That voice, the one that speaks before anyone else has the chance to, is the blueprint for how we see ourselves, how we show up in the world, and ultimately, how we are shaped by it. There is immense power in how we speak to ourselves, and it is often either the key to our freedom or the chain that keeps us bound. I've spent decades sitting across from people from every corner of life, billionaires, former prisoners, mothers, visionaries, warriors of spirit, and across all those conversations, one truth has remained constant: how people speak to themselves determines the quality of the life they lead. It determines their courage, it determines their capacity to forgive, to rebuild, to hold faith in the unseen. If you want to understand someone's resilience, don't look at what they say to the world, look at what they say to themselves when they are alone. Self-talk is not just internal chatter, it's not just some abstract practice, it is prayer, it is prophecy, it is programming. The words we whisper to ourselves in moments of uncertainty become the foundations of our belief systems. And belief, well, belief is everything. Belief informs what we will tolerate, what we will dare, what we will hope for. Belief can either break you down or build you into someone you never thought you could become. Now imagine this: a person who constantly tells themselves they are nothing, they are unseen, they are doomed. What kind of life grows from that soil? What kind of spirit thrives in that kind of environment? And on the other side, someone who, even in despair, can look inward and say, "There is something in me that still matters, there is purpose, even if I can't see it. There is a power greater than me that knows my name." That person is already on the path to transformation. We live in a world that tries, every single day, to tell us who we are. Whether it's media, politics, social status, cultural history, so many forces are shouting at us. But the voice that matters the most is the one you carry within, because no one else is with you 24 hours a day. No one else hears your fear in the middle of the night, or feels your heartbeat when you're facing uncertainty. Only you know what you whisper to yourself in the quiet moments, and those whispers become your truth. So what happens when you start speaking to yourself with power, with intention, with a sense of the divine listening? You start to take your words seriously. You begin to align your self-talk with a higher vision of who you are becoming. You stop repeating inherited lies and start choosing your truths. And when that shift begins, everything else around you, circumstances, relationships, opportunities, begins to respond in kind. I've seen women rise from the ashes of their lives because they changed the way they spoke to themselves. I've watched men once trapped in anger or guilt begin to heal because they began to offer themselves new language, new grace. I have seen faith reignite in people who were buried beneath hopelessness, simply because they changed their inner dialogue, and it doesn't happen all at once. That's the thing about self-talk. It's a practice, not a performance. It's not about always getting it right, or being relentlessly positive. It's about being honest, being compassionate, and most of all, being intentional. Even saying to yourself, "I am hurting, but I believe healing is possible," is an act of profound power. Saying, "I feel lost, but I know I'm not alone," invites grace into the room. That is sacred work. That is where true strength is born. When I speak to myself this way, aligned with faith, grounded in clarity, aware of the sacred within me, I am not just talking, I am shaping, I am planting seeds, I am commanding my life to grow in a new direction. Faith is not just something you hold in times of comfort, it is forged in the fire, when nothing else seems to be working, when the path forward is not lit, when the world has gone quiet around you, and you're left alone with the silence and your soul. Faith is not passive, it is a living, breathing force. It demands something from you, and in return, it gives you something no earthly thing ever could, strength that does not shake, even when everything else is trembling. There are moments in life when intellect fails, when your resources dry up, when all the strategies and logic and planning cannot get you out of the pit you're in. That's when faith steps in, not because you summoned it like magic, but because somewhere inside you, there is a knowing, one that is deeper than thought, older than fear, wiser than your worry. That knowing is faith. That knowing says, even now I am held, even here, I am seen, even though I do not understand, I believe there is a purpose. I've often spoken with people who confuse faith with weakness, as if surrendering to something greater than yourself is giving up control, but the truth is, faith is the ultimate act of courage. It is the refusal to collapse, the decision to stand tall when nothing around you validates your hope. Real faith, the kind that lives in the bones of people who have endured, is not about religious performance, it is about spiritual alignment. It is the quiet confidence that even if the world does not move for you today, the one who made the world knows your name, and that alone is enough to keep walking. When I speak to believers, those who rise for prayer at dawn, those who fast not for tradition but for transformation, those who speak the name of Allah not as a ritual, but as a rhythm of life, I see a power that is not fueled by ego or ambition. I see a power that is rooted in submission. But don't misunderstand, submission here is not about defeat, it is about trust. It is about recognizing that you are not the source, but you are connected to the source, and in that connection there is strength that cannot be broken by time or trial. Faith gives structure to chaos, it gives meaning to pain, it gives breath to weary lungs. I have seen people stripped of every worldly possession, yet stand firmer than those who seem to have everything, because they have faith. I have seen eyes light up with conviction even in prison cells, voices steady in hospital beds, hearts unshaken in the face of injustice, all because of faith, not because of what they saw, but because of what they believed. And here's the thing, faith doesn't always look triumphant. Sometimes it looks like tears on a prayer mat. Sometimes it looks like a whispered name in the middle of the night. Sometimes it's just a hand placed over a chest, saying Allah knows, Allah sees. That is not weakness, that is strength in its purest form. That is a power this world cannot calculate. It's not flashy, it's not loud, but it moves mountains. Faith is not about escaping reality, it is about facing it, and still declaring that there is more. It is about standing in the rubble and saying, I still believe. Whoa! It is about walking into the unknown with your head held high, because you know you do not walk alone. It is about letting your heart be led, not by the fear of what could go wrong, but by the trust in the one who never gets it wrong. When faith becomes your foundation, you are no longer defined by what shakes, you are defined by what holds. And what holds is not your bank account, not your accolades, not your control. It is your belief that the Creator of all things is guiding your steps, even when you cannot see where they land. That is strength, that is unshakable power, that is what allows you to keep going when everything says you should have stopped. There is a map we're all given, not one you carry in your pocket, not one you pull up on a screen, but the kind that's drawn in your mind, shaped by your upbringing, your surroundings, your culture, your history. This map tells you where you're from, where you belong, who your people are, and what you're supposed to become. But what happens when that map no longer fits? What happens when the lines others have drawn for you don't match the landscape your soul is longing to walk? That's when you begin the courageous work of reimagining the world, not out there but from within. We've been taught to believe that power comes from controlling external outcomes, geography, status, politics, nations, labels, that where you live, what flag you stand under, what story you claim on paper is what gives you value. But some of the most powerful transformations I've witnessed have nothing to do with land or legacy. They start when a person decides to erase the internal borders that have been limiting them, borders made of fear, shame, identity, that was inherited but never chosen. So when we speak of something being erased from the map, let us not think only of physical nations or boundaries. Let us think of it as a metaphor, a deeper spiritual metaphor. What does it mean for an old identity to be erased? What does it look like when a version of yourself that was built on survival, on silence, on someone else's expectations, is wiped clean? That is the work of reimagining. That is the rebirth. It is not destruction, it is divine clearing. We are not fixed beings, we are landscapes, and like any landscape, we change with the seasons, with the storms, with the light. There are parts of us that must be rewritten, not because they were wrong, but because they are no longer serving where we are going. And the world you create within, the map you draw with your faith, your values, your vision, that world begins to inform the one you live in. The most dangerous thing we can do is let someone else define our entire world for us. The moment you accept someone else's narrative about who you are, where you come from, what you're worth, you surrender the pen. You stop being the cartographer of your own life. You stop creating and start conforming, and conforming is the slowest form of spiritual death, because deep down, your soul knows that the real terrain has nothing to do with what's on a page or in a textbook. It has to do with what you carry inside. I have seen people born in turmoil, raised in displacement, who carry more peace than those surrounded by comfort. I have met men and women who have lost everything, their country, their family, their home, and yet what they've built inside themselves is more stable than any political structure. That's the power of reimagining. That's what it means to say, the map they gave me doesn't hold me anymore. I am drawing a new one. And when your internal world begins to shift, everything else has to catch up, because the soul does not lie. It may wait, it may whisper, it may ache, but when it finally speaks with clarity, with alignment, it changes everything. It tells you to leave behind identities that were handed to you in fear. It tells you to walk away from names you were never meant to wear. It tells you that you are more than your bloodline, more than your birthplace, more than your past. And that truth, that is the new territory. That is where you begin to live. There are people who have been told their culture is disappearing, their names don't belong, their languages are fading, their faith is a threat. But I have seen these same people rise, not because they forced the world to see them, but because they saw themselves first. And that vision, that clarity, that dignity, it redefines every border, it reclaims every narrative, it redraws the map, not through violence, not through ego, but through awakening. Reimagining the world from within is not a fantasy, it is a sacred responsibility. The world will keep changing its borders, shifting its politics, rewriting its stories, but the only world you will always carry is the one inside you. And when that world is strong, when that world is rooted in truth, in faith, in divine identity, then no matter what map they show you, you are never lost, because the world you live in starts from within you. There is a point in every spiritually awake life where you begin to realize that the world is not as divided as we've been led to believe, that underneath the noise, beyond the borders and flags and ideologies, there is one beating heart we all belong to. That heart is not owned by any one nation, tribe, or belief. It is the divine will, it is the eternal intelligence, it is the power that orchestrates stars and still pays attention when you whisper a prayer at 3 a.m. That power does not play favorites. It moves with wisdom we cannot always understand, but it is always moving. We live in a time where everything feels separate. We're told to pick sides, to define ourselves against one another. This group, that faith, this race, that gender, this identity, that history. But the more you listen to the voice of the divine, the deeper that voice echoes in your being, the more you begin to realize that this separation is not the truth, it is the illusion. The truth is connection, the truth is purpose, the truth is that every person is born with a place in the divine plan, and no one's existence is random, no soul is misplaced. When I think about divine will, I don't think of it as some distant force dictating life from above. I think of it as a current, a rhythm, something that runs underneath all of us, calling us to rise into who we are meant to be, not just as individuals, but as part of a greater whole. And when we align with that will, When we step out of the illusion of separation and into the flow of divine purpose, something powerful happens. Our view of the world changes, our language changes, our relationships change, and ultimately, the world around us must shift to reflect the world within us. Global consciousness begins there, not with changing laws or rewriting borders, but with changing awareness, with seeing that the divine is not trapped in temples or mosques, or books or rituals. The divine is living in every human breath, in every kind act, in every moment we choose truth over fear, dignity over pride, compassion over control. The divine is not somewhere else, it is here, and when we become aware of that, we stop fighting for power in the old ways, we stop chasing domination, and start embodying devotion. We stop trying to conquer and start trying to connect. The power of divine will is not about asserting that one faith or one people have been chosen above others. It is about recognizing that divine power flows where faith is pure, that wherever there is surrender, wherever there is integrity, wherever there is trust in the unseen, that is where miracles begin, that is where change takes root, not in declarations, but in devotion, not in erasure, but in awakening. I've watched people who had no army, no money, no social position, stand taller than kings, because their faith made them unshakable, and I've seen people with every worldly advantage fall apart, because they had no spiritual ground to stand on. Divine will doesn't bend to human ego, it doesn't serve political agendas, it is not impressed by status or numbers or appearances, it moves in silence, it moves in sincerity, it moves through those who are willing to be led, not by their own ambition, but by the deep unwavering voice that says this is who I am, and this is what I serve. And when enough people begin to live that way, not for ego, but for alignment, consciousness shifts. You don't have to wait for the world to change. You don't have to wait for nations to collapse or power structures to fall. You become the change. You live from a place that transcends the news cycle, that rises above the noise, and in doing so, you become part of something larger than yourself, a movement that is not televised, not politicized, but divinely ordained, one that is not defined by destruction, but by devotion. Global consciousness is not about everyone thinking the same, or praying the same, or living the same. It is about realizing that at our deepest level, we are all tuned to the same sacred frequency. Some call it Allah, some call it Source, some call it the universe, but the name is less important than the knowing, and when that knowing takes root, it becomes impossible to live small, impossible to live afraid, impossible to reduce yourself to a label when you were created to be a light. There is a language that lives beneath every spoken tongue, every dialect, every cultural phrase. It is not taught in schools, yet everyone who has lived through loss, through hardship, through silence and stillness, knows how to speak it. It's the language of resilience. It doesn't need to be translated because it is felt. It lives in the eyes of a mother who has held her family together through war. It pulses in the spine of a child who keeps rising after every fall. It echoes in the prayers whispered by the faithful, regardless of what name they call God. Resilience is universal, because struggle is universal, and so is the strength born from it. Every person at some point in their life will face something that brings them to their knees. It might be loss, it might be betrayal, it might be the crushing weight of being unseen, unheard, or misunderstood. And in those moments, when the world feels like it has closed in on you, there is a sacred decision to be made. Do I collapse under this, or do I learn to breathe through it? Do I believe the pain, or do I believe the purpose? That choice, that sacred turn inward, is where resilience begins. It does not start with strength, it starts with surrender. It starts with letting the storm pass through you, without letting it define you. Resilience is not reserved for the powerful, it is not something you're born with, or something only a few chosen ones inherit. It belongs to everyone. It belongs to the woman raising children alone, to the elder tending land that generations tried to erase, to the refugee who still sings songs of home, even when that home no longer exists on a map. It belongs to the man rebuilding his soul one prayer at a time, after breaking it with his own hands. It belongs to the believer who holds on to faith even when the world calls it foolish. We live in a time that tries to measure resilience in productivity. How fast can you bounce back? How quickly can you move on? But true resilience isn't about speed, it's about depth. It's about what roots you down when everything else is shaking. It's about how you talk to yourself in the dark. It's about whether or not you can remember your worth when nothing around you reflects it. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet act of still standing. And resilience doesn't mean you don't cry. It doesn't mean you don't grieve or question or doubt. It means you do all of that and still return to yourself. It means you let the questions come, but you don't let them become your identity. It means you let yourself feel the weight of your humanity, but you don't let it drown your divinity. That balance, that sacred holding of both pain and power, is what allows the soul to grow through what it goes through. There is no greater force than a soul that has chosen to rise without bitterness. That is the miracle of resilience, to endure without becoming hardened, to suffer without becoming cruel, to lose everything, and still keep your heart open to love, to God, to people. That is not weakness, that is strength that this world does not always recognize, but heaven does. In every culture, in every faith, there is a version of this story, a story of someone who should have been broken, but wasn't, a story of a people who were scattered, but still prayed, a story of a land erased, but a legacy remembered in spirit. These stories live in us, they shape us, they remind us that resilience isn't just personal, it's collective, it's ancestral, it's spiritual, and perhaps most sacred of all is the truth that resilience is not rooted in proving yourself to the world, it's rooted in remembering who you are, even when the world forgets. It is not found in resistance for resistance' sake, but in the quiet return to dignity, time and time again. It's in knowing that while others may try to define your worth, your voice, your place, you answer to something higher. You move by a different rhythm, you rise for a different reason, and in that rise, in that sacred steady rising, you speak a language that every soul understands, even if no words are spoken at all. Conclusion, returning to the voice within. When I speak to myself this way, when I call myself back to truth, when I choose faith over fear, when I remember that the divine breath still moves through me, I am not just comforting myself, I am recentering, reclaiming, I am declaring to every shadow that has ever tried to silence me, that I am not here by accident, that my voice, my presence, my being is part of something eternal, something powerful, something sacred. This is not just about personal healing, this is about collective awakening, this is about remembering that no map drawn by man can erase what was written by God, that borders can shift, but spirit cannot be erased, that entire nations may be denied, but the legacy of faith, of prayer, of resilience cannot be removed from the heart of a people who know who they are in the eyes of the divine. We are not powerless, we are not voiceless, we are not invisible, we are the children of a force that cannot be controlled by history books or political agendas. We are the ones who rise from ashes and still build, who grieve and still give, who lose and still believe. That is not weakness, that is the language of strength, the rhythm of resilience, the truth of global consciousness, bound by divine will. So when the world forgets you, remember yourself. When they try to define you, return to your own knowing. When they erase you, rewrite yourself in faith. And above all, when you speak to yourself, speak with the same voice that formed galaxies, bold, certain, sacred, and free.